Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight on Facebook Live on the Celeste Williams for Arkansas page. I'm Stephanie Baker, Communications Director with Team Celeste, and I'm joined here tonight with Celeste Williams, nurse practitioner running for U.S. Congress here in Arkansas's 3rd District, and Reverend Sharon Risher, who is our very special guest, and we're honored to have her here tonight. Wave, everybody. Hi. Just as a little bit of background, we decided to do this town hall ahead of Wear Orange Weekend and National Gun Violence Awareness Day, which is this Friday, June 5th. And Reverend Risher has a harrowing story to tell y'all. I'm going to let her tell it. But just as a little bit of background, she is a Moms Demand Action national spokesperson, an Everytown survivor volunteer. She has spoken all across the country about her story. She's been in documentaries, and she's an author. She wrote this book right here, For Such a Time as This, about her experience as a survivor and her journey to forgiveness. And we are giving away a signed copy of this book. At the end of the broadcast, I'll announce the winner of that. And I'll also give a link to anybody who wants to purchase the book on their own. So I'm going to let you two get started, and we will jump right in.
Sharon, I really appreciate you doing this. And I have to say, I am a recovering ICU nurse. And so I feel like hospital chaplains are so important. And you are my people. And so I am just really excited to have this conversation today.
Well, it's definitely good to be with a fellow hospital person. The ICU was one of the areas that I covered, and you get close to the nurses, you know, the people on staff, and all of our wants is to make sure that our patient is comfortable and cared for every way possible. So I will always carry that hospital chaplain ness and a closeness to nurses and doctors and all who work in a hospital setting.
It's so important, and not just for patients and their family members, but I think that it's the nurses too who need that comfort at times, and really appreciate that. So I think you have an amazing and powerful story, and so I would love to let you share that with our audience.
Okay, so unless you've been under a rock, on June 17th, 2015, a young white supremacist walked into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina on a hot summer's night. Earlier in the evening, the Bible study started maybe about 7, I believe. The church was packed full of people. They had started to really think about canceling that Bible study, but they didn't. And so about 12 people stayed, and in comes Dylan Roof, coming in saying he wanted to be a part of the Bible study, and they showed him in, and he asked to be seated next to Reverend Pinckney, the pastor of the church, and they invited him into the circle of things. And after about an hour of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, the parable of the sower, they were in prayer when it was over, and he took his Glock 45 and commenced to slaughtering them. How I heard about all of this, I was at work doing my chaplain's duty at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas, and I had been working with a family whose grandfather had died. They knew he was dying, so they were kind of stoic in their manner. And for some reason that night, I had forgotten my death paperwork. There's always paperwork to fill out, and I didn't have it, and I needed to go back to my office. And, you know, I say it's only by the Spirit of God led me to my telephone, because I would have left it alone. But something said, check your phone. because I had it on my desk, and I had several missed calls from my daughter, and that started a nightmare night for me. It wasn't until about maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, after getting off early from work, because I knew something terrible had happened and I couldn't concentrate, and I just needed to get out that hospital. And I went home and turned on the TV, and I'm seeing that, what's going on at the church. The people, they're not saying who, if there were fatalities. I'm just kind of, I'm calling around. I called my mother's phone after I finished with the family. I had to go back. I finished with them. I got back to my office, started calling, and called my baby sister, who had not had the TV on, and alerted her. And so hours of calling back and forth and not hearing anything, not knowing anything, and receiving a telephone call about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when my niece said, Auntie, the chaplain wants to talk to you. And I knew then that she was gone. That chaplains had kicked in for a little bit in the walking around of being anxious, because I said to myself, if it's taking them this long, then they're dead. Yeah. And they're getting it together, because, So that's how all of that started, with that one night, living 1,700 miles away and having survivor's guilt, which I guess you kind of call it irrational guilt, because that you're not supposed to feel guilty about that, because that's out of your control. You would have never been able to do anything, but I did carry that I was not in Charleston. I was not there with my family and the other families, and that I had to deal with that 1,700 miles away by myself, in a place where there were people that I knew, but I didn't have any family connections, and to feel so utterly alone. Yeah. So, yeah.
I just think, like, so much of your story is what we are seeing across this nation right now. It is racism, it is violence, it is specifically gun violence.
Yes.
And I'm curious how, your book is about forgiveness. How do you forgive someone who took that away from you, who took those you love away from you?
For me, the only way that I could have gotten towards forgiveness was because of my faith. Mm-hmm. And that I wholly believe in the fact that because I was once in sin and God forgave me for my sins and loved me, that eventually I would get to forgiveness. Because you see, for the forgiveness narrative started 48 hours after the killings, when the family members were in Charleston. I hadn't even gotten into Charleston yet, and they were at that bond hearing. And when the judge asked the family members if they had anything they wanted to say, then that came out. And at that time, I was crazy. When I heard my sister's voice on the television, still in Dallas, talking about, I forgive you, all I could do was scream and holler again, because my brains could not compute. Wait a minute, what is she talking about? Mm-hmm. So this process of going towards forgiveness was a process. It wasn't something that just happened and I said, well, if God can forgive, I know. It took me a lot of prayer. It took a lot of days of being depressed and not wanting to get out of bed. It took a lot of days of saying some choice words to God, knowing that the God I believe in was able to let me express how I really felt as his child. And I felt comfortable and safe enough to be able to speak to God in that way. So forgiveness wasn't easy. And then I got to the point where I really had to look at it as a spiritual discipline. And if I was going to preach the gospel and hope to people, that I had to be able to show them how you get to that and get to that point where you have that burden lifted off of you, because that's really what's it about when it comes down to it. You won't ever forget. Mm-hmm. But you come to a place where you're tired of the heaviness. You're tired of that weight, that heaviness in your chest, that with a faith and a belief in something higher than you could get to that point and be able to survive and try to move on a little bit by a little bit, because that's a heavy thing to carry. It's a heavy thing to carry. And I, almost 2 years of carrying that. And actually, when I did say I forgave him, I was preaching. So I know all of this is through God. And it took me a long time, because I was in it in the beginning as a daughter and a grieving daughter. And God has taken all of that and used it for what he wanted me to be able to do. But I had to go through that. I guess I had to, in order to be able to be used as a hurting person and to connect with other hurting people, and for them to see how horrific hate with a gun can be. Yeah.
Reverend Risher, your story is tragic and harrowing, and I think that right now it's especially poignant considering what our country is going through as we're witnessing this collective uprising of anguish and outrage. I wonder what your reaction is to what we're seeing nationally right now.
You know, I've been asked that question, and it's a lot of conflicting emotions about that. First of all, for Black people to continue to have to go through this systematic racism, that we still have to look at our Blackness first before we're able to just be regular people and going about the purposes we believe that God has given us, you know, to raise a family, to be a part of a religious community, to have that American dream when it comes to the house and being able to support your family and send your kids to college. We all want that. But for us Black Americans, we have to think Black first. And everything that we do, and the continuing killing, the blatantness of it all continues to traumatize everything that we have been through as a people. And it's like, when will America know that there is no America without us? And why can't you see that? I know what Breonna Taylor's family and George Floyd's family and all the families that really have had national attention because of whatever violence they were involved in, that their lives are turned upside down. I know about all of the press. I know about people wanting to talk to you, lawyers around, people grabbing at you, and you're in a fog trying to figure out what just happened. So I have a different perspective on that. And with the protesters, we have been given that right. I don't condone the looting and all of those things. And see, people have been saying this. I'm not out there, but I understand. And that's for real. I'm out there with them in my heart. I mean, protesting is not something that I have done a lot. You know, I have bad knees, so I can't walk 2 blocks without saying, ooh, I can't do this. But I'm with them in spirit. I'm with them for what they are trying to accomplish, to have their voices and anger heard. And sometimes there has to be a burning and cleansing in order for a rebirth. And I hate to say that, but so yeah, that's where I'm at with all of this. It's weary. It's really weary to continue to have this compounded, and we get ready to go into the 5th anniversary for Charleston, and we're not going to be able to gather as a community and still grieve in a different way. The grief is different, but to honor their legacies, we won't be able to get to do that in Charleston. But that's why I guess I'm here, because I will never stop talking about Charleston and the reasons why, the racism, the white supremacy, all of these things that we continue to deal with. And it's just sad to say that we're going to be dealing with this, because that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is.
I think that we are all tired, and certainly your burden is much greater than my own right now, in carrying all and feeling all of the pain that I think that we are all going through as a nation right now.
Yes.
And I think there is no justice for you and your family. There is no justice for the family of George Floyd. But there is accountability.
Yes.
And I think that we have to we are not going to go back to normal.
Never. Because so normal for Black people is knowing that we're Black people and we have to walk a certain line. You have to be conscious of everything you do, and then now we get to, Black men. That's a whole nother thing. I have a 39-year-old son who's professional, that drives a really nice car and all of that. That doesn't mean anything. His degrees and advancement doesn't mean anything because his skin is still Black. He's 39 years old, and I still worry about my 39-year-old Black son.
Yes.
I mean, just because he's not wearing baggy pants and a big, you know what I'm saying? Because his persona is different, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, that statement of being colorblind is just garbage, because that's the first thing that when we see another human being is what they look like. And you can't be blind to the color of someone's skin or their hair or what the clothes they're wearing. It's just automatic, and there has to be just an acceptance of them as a human being. And so, I think about, what is the normal that we want to create. I think in every tragedy, if we all come together and work, we can create an opportunity for something better. And, from my perspective of, running for office, and the whole reason I became a nurse in the first place was because I still believe that my calling was to reduce human suffering. And so as a nurse, it was to do that with the person in front of me. And I certainly couldn't address all the problems that I see in an exam room. And so when I look at it as what can I do, if elected, is that we have to have, I don't think we can legislate away racism in an individual.
Right. You can't.
Right. And we can come together to work to tear down the systems in place that create inequality and promote racism. And, you know, from my perspective, that looks like making sure that there are equal educational opportunities, equal pay for equal work, and making sure that we work to reduce the disparities that we see in healthcare. It should never be more dangerous for a woman to give birth just because she's Black.
Yes.
And there are so many areas of injustice that we all have to come together and decide that it's not okay anymore. And, you know, so that's my perspective from a legislative view. And I think spirituality is certainly in your wheelhouse. How do we as individuals move forward to forgive one another and come together to work for better?
Wow.
And I know that's a big question.
It is, because see, in the work I do, you try to reach everybody, and not everybody is from a faith background.
No.
So sometimes we have to meet people where they are. And so for me, regardless of if you're a person of faith or not, my first thing is that I can be kind to you because you're a person.
Yes.
I'm not going to be colorblind because I want to see you and I want you to see me. And understanding that we might be different in certain things, but we all still want to be loved. We all want to be shown kindness. And so if we can start with just being kind to one another, that's a start. And then for people of faith, we have our trust in God through Jesus Christ. And for those of us who have that Christian faith, we have our Holy Bible that's a guide to let us know things and to glean wisdom. And as people of faith, our job is to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And so we really have to do that. It's just not these words in a book. It's not about you're a number in church and you're a deacon or whatever, and you're listening to Sunday after Sunday of sermons, and then your life doesn't portray that. And the bottom line is, if you're kind, other things will follow that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And I think that you don't have to be a person of faith to work through like the principles of grace. And I think that there is such a lack of grace in the world today.
Right.
And it is, I mean, I know that it was not easy for you to get to a point of forgiveness, but you're right. It is that spiritual practice. And I think if you can forgive someone who murdered your family, then the rest of us ought to be able to forgive somebody who didn't vote the same way that we did.
Exactly.
We ought to be able to extend that grace, because that's the only way we can be forgiven and move towards a place of redemption.
Yeah. We hold on. We hold on, and it comes to a point where why are you holding on to this? We can agree to disagree, but I still can love you. I can still care about you. You know, if this is a subject that we won't talk about or whatever, we don't, but I'm still going to care about you. I'm still wanting to see the best for you. And that's where we need to get. It's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to stop caring and loving one another. And when we do that, we can get past some things. Yeah.
Reverend Risher, I've heard you talk about this before. I've heard you tell your story several times. And one thing that struck me when you talk about the arduous journey that you took towards forgiveness, you do mention that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean absolving that person of their actions or their crime. They are still held accountable. And with that in mind, what are some things that we can do as a society right now in this moment that we're in to hold our friends and family accountable while we also extend grace and move forward together?
Well, the first thing you have to do is be able to have a conversation and get uncomfortable. You can't try to work something out when you have not had a conversation. You've not had a chance for each person to listen to the other person and then try to process that. So it's not maybe a fast thing that's going to happen, because people are not going to be vulnerable just because you want to have a conversation. But if there are people you care about, people that you want to say, I care about you, I want to hear what it is that you have to say, and then I can listen to you, and then we can make up our minds how we feel about a certain thing. So we have to be able to build relationships. We have to be able to have hard conversations, and these conversations might lead to being uncomfortable, but you have to get uncomfortable to be able to really listen, to really hear. Yeah.
And I think conversations are easier when you have relationship with them. And I think too many of us, and certainly as a nation, avoidance has been our coping mechanism of choice. We don't talk about race in this country. We don't talk about the hurt of racism and the hurt of violence. And it doesn't hurt just the victim. It hurts all of us. And I think there's so much that we gain when we have relationship with people outside our own little realm of perspective.
Yes.
It makes us better people.
Mm-hmm. We have to be able, and then another thing we have to do, we have to be willing to take a risk.
Mm-hmm.
You can't stay in your safe little bubble and hope to do things. You have to be able to say that, I'm going to go to this black church this Sunday. I've never done that in my life, but I'm going to go because I've always been interested in going. Mm-hmm. And the risk taking of going will give you another perspective of, in being in a black church and how black people worship. To understand that is a lot of understanding about who we are as a people, or being able to go over to that mental health clinic and volunteer. Yes. Because you have credentials and you could go to the mental health clinic in the hood and take a risk and volunteer once or twice a week or whatever. So we have to be able to communicate. We have to be willing to take risk. Yeah. We have to be willing to vote. Oh, it's just so much. It's just so much.
I'm going to just interject really quickly that if anybody watching has a question, go ahead and put it in the comments. We'll see. We're about to wrap up pretty soon, but I just wanted to let y'all know that if you do have a question and you put it in the comments, I probably have time to ask one question of Reverend Risher. I also want to point out that I placed a link to her book in the comments. So if anyone is interested in purchasing her book, it's lovely. I have a copy of it here. It's a great book. My copy is signed, and one lucky person watching this is going to have the signed copy as well. There's my signature. So if you'd like to purchase that book, that link is there, and I'm going to let them finish, and then I'll wrap up and name the person who is fortunate enough to get that signed copy from Reverend Risher.
Well, I want to acknowledge one other thing when you were talking about what it takes, and I think that vulnerability is also super important, because I know as a white lady who grew up in rural America in a super white community that my perspective is probably not the same as yours.
Yes.
And I may someday say something really insensitive or thoughtless that I don't realize is offensive. And I think we have to be comfortable with that pain. Maybe not pain. Pain's probably a little bit of a dramatic word, but just that discomfort of hurting somebody's feelings and realizing it was your fault. And I think when you have friends that are different than you, they can help you learn that in a safe way. And as human beings, all make mistakes. And that's where that grace comes back in.
And that's why you have to surround yourself with people.
Yes.
And I'm going to say this, so all of the church people, I mean, just be cool. We have to have people around us who will call us out on our shit.
Yes.
Yep.
But see, for a black person, now let me tell you, for a black person, we are talking to you in our heads because we have to make a decision about how we're, even if we're going to call you out, because that could cause a whole nother ball game.
Right.
So the kind of relationship that you have with people dictates you being able to be called out and say, hey, this just don't sound right. I think you need to rethink that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not willing to do that because we're not willing to do that. And we have to be able to do that in love and truth. And for people to accept that I'm not saying you're a bad person, but let me kind of set you straight a little bit.
Because we all need to be set straight every once in a while. And white people cannot call the police just because someone who is black says something you disagree with or because you're scared. Like, that is putting someone else's life at risk.
Right.
And until we have a world where the law is enforced equally,
yes,
then we need to just get some thicker skin and talk to one another.
We have a lot of work to do. And I don't know if all of this stuff I don't think it'll ever resolve. I know I have hope in knowing that things will happen, and through the silver lining, through this corona, that people are feeling things and having opportunity to do things that they've kind of never had before. Yes, black people are affected disproportionately through the healthcare and economics in the whole 9 yards. And that's a shame, but I believe that there will be changes in a person's psyche because you've had time. And I believe if you have not grown as a person, because now you had to be privileged less like everybody else. Mm-hmm. See, it wasn't like all black people had to stay home. Everybody had to stay home.
Yes.
So I believe that there is going to be an underlying growth, hopefully, of people looking at the world different. Really understanding when they say when one hurt, we all hurt. Yes. Because that's really true. And for people to really have had just a chance to do some soul searching and self-reflection, because I have. And I just know that my relationship with God is much more closer. I've had time to really get to know my daughter on an adult level because she's been at home through Corona. She got married, things changed, all of that. But not everything that causes us pain is bad, huh?
Yeah. No. Birth pain.
You know,
get something beautiful.
There is always, for people of faith, now I'm just talking to people of faith, we always know that no matter how tough it gets, there is a silver lining underneath. And that's what keeps you going, that hope of knowing that we hope and not fear, because we believe in a higher power than us.
I'm going to interject there to just make an announcement and let everyone know that Catherine Ross, I'm not sure if she's still viewing, but she was viewing a moment ago. Catherine Ross, you have been the randomly selected winner of tonight's signed copy of Sharon Risher's book. I happen to know Catherine. She is an active Moms Demand Action volunteer in the town just next to mine. And so I know she'll be very excited about getting that. And for everyone else, you can see the link in the comments to get your own copy of her amazing, incredible book to hear more about her story. I'm going to be quiet the rest of this time and let you guys close out. I didn't see any other questions come through, so just whatever you guys want to say to Arkansas today before we say goodbye.
So I want to just say thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation. And I would like both of us to give our viewers some sort of call to action before we close out. So I'll let you go first.
Okay, the call to action. The call to action is to get out there and vote your conscience, to vote for gun sense candidates, to understand that gun violence is a crisis. It has gotten worse through COVID, and we must pass legislation to have common sense gun laws. We have to elect people like Miss Celeste Williams who will fight for the people, who understand the everyday common person, to know that in order for things to change, we have to have policy change, and Celeste will be a policy change maker. So that's my call to action, to vote, and to vote your heart, and to vote knowing that we live in the best place we could live in, even with all the stuff we have going on. And it's our responsibility as citizens to uphold that. So that's my call to action.
I love that. And I feel like I'm sort of switching place with you, because that was a very a legislative, political kind of, I'm spiritual.
Spiritually, we got to keep praying. We got to keep praying because we know prayer works. And so the call to action for people of faith is to continue to pray. And we know that as sacrificial people, we have to pray for the people that we want to choke. But we will pray for them. We will pray for them.
Amen to that. I want to challenge everyone to start a practice, and as Sharon talked about, a spiritual practice of forgiveness. I want everyone to, and you don't have to be a person of faith to have a
right.
spiritual practice.
Exactly.
I would like to see everyone make it a practice to work towards an end of racism, and to work towards giving one another grace and forgiving one another, so that we can all come together and be the people, the community, and the nation that we want to be, and to live our values that all of us are created equal.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Amen.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I love the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And talk for hours.
Yeah, I know, right? But really, I am humbled that you asked me, and I just continue to do what I can in the lane that God has put me in, and so here we are.
We're all here for a purpose, and you
definitely.
yours, and it was not an easy road, and
thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks to everyone who's watching tonight. Good night, everyone.
Good night.